Um, we, we are blessed to have this wonderful panel, and you'll get a chance to hear their stories and encounter them as a part of this as well. But I wanted to bring us into this moment with a word of scripture. I just invite you to just kind of slow down in all of this stuff and just take a deep breath and come into this moment as we engage this wonderful ministry together. I do want to share with you a passage from John 14, which I thought was appropriate considering we're talking about preparing the way for this innovative ministry. Do not let your hearts be troubled, Jesus says. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house, there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. And you know the way to the place where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will know my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. So often we hear this as the way we've always been taught, that place is somewhere way far away. That way up in the clouds when heaven comes about. And I think as we study, we engage that in many, many different ways that open us up to understand that the way and the journey is ongoing. And I tend to think of our Lord preparing tomorrow for us, not sometime way far away, but that whatever happens, that's already being prepared. And I believe we as transitional interim pastors are invited to prepare the way for that blessed ministry, for that innovative ministry, that we will hear from our panelists and that we will celebrate together and engage. And so I look forward to seeing where the Spirit will take us as we engage this conversation. Let us pray. Gracious God, you are the way that we are called to follow, and you call us to prepare that way. We give you thanks for our leaders that have been so willing to share their stories and to engage us. And you call us, O Lord, to help prepare the way for your ministry. You call us to be vessels of that. Guide us in this conversation, in this time, that we may learn and grow and draw closer to you and to each other. For in your hands we commend this journey. In your precious name we pray. Amen. So I do want to say that it's a rather simple agenda that we're going to follow. Basically, each panelist is going to have 15 minutes to share a little bit of their story, and they'll present that in any which way that they feel best. And then after that, we're going to take a little bit of a break, allow a stretch. And then at 2:45, we're going to come back into breakout rooms. And you will get to choose your breakout room based upon the panelists that you kind of wanted to engage on certain areas. I tried to tell the panelists, this isn't a competition. We're not going to look and say, how many see, I beat so-and-so, I got more over there. It's more to say, whichever one the Spirit draws you into, whether small or large, the group is going to be powerful and dynamic. And then we're going to come back together. And after we do, we're just going to share some feedback that we heard and try and summarize and draw together maybe some things we learned together that seems common in terms of preparing the way for innovative ministries. And then at 3:30, we're going to share some information about IMA and then close from there. So rather simple to go forward. And I'm going to invite Sarah to start us out and tell us a little bit about your ministry and this is your time.
All right. Can you hear me okay, everyone? Thumbs up on hearing me fine? Great. Well, thank you so much, Keith and Patsy and Dick and Eric and all of you for this opportunity to share with you on this panel today. When I was invited and asked by our former bishop, Brian Moss, and he shared what it was, I began to get very excited thinking about what goodness this could bring. Of so many congregations often wait until that called leader gets into place. And it's almost this marking time and losing a momentum that happens in transitional ministry. So I'm so excited to share with you today. But before I share a little bit more about that, everyone, I'd like to share with you a little bit about who I am. This is who I am, the basis. I am a baptized child of God. When I graduated from Wartburg Seminary, my then professor, Frombach, he gave each of us as advisees a beautiful tapestry that says, "You are a baptized child of God. Whatever else you are, remember that you are that. For that is the basis of whatever else you are." I hold that tight, and I'll show you why, of what effects being such an innovative leader has and what that means for what you feel and what you live through and survive and thrive through too. Also, I am blessed to be married. I've been married to my husband, Nick, for the last 19 years. We were seminary sweethearts. He is called deacon in the ELCA, and he currently serves in many facets. One of those is here as our church. He is our worship and media tech, so that was handy for the shutdown when I had him right there. And also a lot of our youth coordinating work of our youth ministries. And I am so blessed to be a mother as well, too. My son, Nathaniel, is 17, and he's a junior in high school. And my daughter, Samantha, she's going to turn 15 on Thursday, and she is a freshman in high school. Getting to have this family is the best gig of my life. And then I am called as a pastor, as you heard Keith say. I was in youth ministry full-time for 5 years before I went to seminary. I got to serve out in Fresno, California. Although I grew up here in Iowa, I got to experience a different part of our country and had a true joy where I came to the discernment of going into seminary for the sake of being able to accompany families along these blessings of living out their baptismal promises to their children. And as you heard Keith share, this is the congregation I currently serve. This is Luther Memorial Church in Syracuse, Nebraska. We're just about 25 minutes southeast of Lincoln to help mark where you are. Although we are a rural, small area, we are getting redistricted, our line is, because we are growing. We are such an accessible area to Lincoln and Omaha. So actually, by the end of the year, we'll be having about 45 new members joining us, which is an exciting time. And the pictures I put on here, one of our great loves is our outreach, God's work, our hands. The picture on the top was our first one 8 years ago that we did when I came to this congregation. And the one on the bottom was just yesterday. So that was our 9th God work, our hands, that we have such joy together. In answering and describing the ministry, I want to use the word vocation, as we often do as ELCA Lutherans. Vocation, of course, as you know, is that call. And what is my unique call in ministry? Prior to serving here, I served out in the Western Panhandle of Nebraska and served a parish made up of 4 points. Also, we had a camp in our midst as well, too. As you can imagine, as many rural areas have already been marked by such adaptive change because of the agricultural economy, so were our congregations. I realized quickly that my skill set, my toolbox that I brought from seminary did not offer to me the gifts that I needed to help congregations make that adaptive change. Hence why I went and got my doctorate of ministry. So I've discerned my unique vocation is empowering congregations to shift from programs to process, from silver bullets to spirit driven, from inward looking to gathered and sent in order to discover their own unique congregational vocation amidst God's mission. I believe each of our congregations is like each of our individual members and participants. We have our own uniqueness, and we need not compete with other congregations because our own uniqueness is who God calls us to be and how folks find fit with our congregation versus another. So the way of which that I have done this innovative work with congregations, including that 4-Point Parish, my current congregation of which I am a part of now, who was all part of my research process when I did my doctorate, bless their hearts, and now getting to work on the synodical level as we have a vitality initiative. We are working with 8 congregations. This is how we've taken these congregations through the exploration of these 4 questions. The first is quite simple, but we often forget to ask it. We skip to what do we need to do? What do we need to do? But the first is, who are we? And this is a wonderful deep study of the congregational history. I've also found that it's been a way that while you do that history, it allows the congregation to grieve what was no more as well. It's a way to explore the demographic data, especially with the major shifts that have come to our areas, and to do intentional congregational interviews. The second question we ask in the process are, who are our neighbors? This is an intentional work to go out to your neighbors. Several of our congregations in our synodical work have discovered that everyone used to live by their church building, but now everybody commutes into their church building. So they're doing intentional work, talking to the neighbors and finding out who they are so they can discover their ministry. The third question is, how is the Spirit calling us to respond? Spiritual practice are a major component of this process, and I'll show you why if I have enough time. A faithful journey or a framing journey and a biblical narrative. When our congregation went through this process, we grabbed onto the tree of life from the book of Revelation because the leaves become the healing for all nations, and we felt called to be that tree. And then answering the Spirit and how to respond is by just going forward in faithful experimentation. Because when you've done the exploration of who are we, who are our neighbors, there begins to be an intersection that begins to come up through the bubbling of the Holy Spirit to lead you. But this is not measured by our world standards of measurement, but in the grown connections with God and with each other. And the last question is, what lenses help frame what we have discerned? The other 3 questions very much could have been for any institution, but we are the Church of Christ. We are called, and God's mission is what comes through to us. So lenses are how we frame, and I'll show you a picture of how this all comes together. But we frame it by saying, God calls us as this congregation to be a presence in this community, the incarnation, Jesus Christ, or others, theology of the cross, transformation, or you could insert transfiguration, holy community. And then also theoretical lenses, open system. All you have to imagine to know what that is a huddle in a football game before. Imagine if they only sat there looking inward, closed system, but looking out and receiving and responding with the energy of the environment around is an open system. Of course, listening, transformational leadership, and there's so many more to that. All of this, of course, everyone, is framed in the mission that we are called to live out, but remembering that this mission is not ours. Oftentimes we get confused in our mission statement saying, it's our mission God calls us to do. Same thing as it's not our church. It's God's church, it's God's mission. Just a reminder of the beautiful Missio Dei we use. It is derived from the very nature of who God is. And I am a visual person, so this classical doctrine picture is just right to singing to my heart. God the Father sending the Son, God the Father and the Son sending the Spirit. And that's expanded into the movement of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit sending the church into the world. And of course, right alongside with that is vocation, as I spoke already. That call, the summons, comes from the Latin word vocare, to call. Hold this. I love this definition. It's a special urge, inclination, predisposition, because remember how the Spirit's going to be bubbling and stirring to a particular career or call, especially. And the work we've done in our synod, Pastor Adam White, he put on a wool sweater and did this marvelous video talking about we love our wool sweaters and the comfort and the goodness we feel in them. And there's such good fit, but also they create an itch that makes you move. That is vocation. And he also showed us this. Oftentimes we as churches are like a garden hose kinked up. And you know, of course, then the water cannot flow through. Our vocation is to unkink the hose of God's love, grace, justice, so it can flow from God's agent. When you put these two together, this is what you get. The innovative work that comes out as God's mission has a church, with each congregation having its own unique vocation. God's mission has a church. Notice God's mission is first. It is not the church has a mission. God's mission has a church, with each congregation having its own unique vocation. This is just a reminder, everyone, but most often I can remind as transitional ministers or correlate in that often they've looked outside themselves for that expertise, or they're looking for that expert, perfect leader, pastor, that silver bullet to come in and fix them. We look for the quick fix. We look for the glory days to return. But this is what adaptive change means of innovation. We shift in ministry. And just to remind you what I have down there below in shifting, the Holy Spirit, we and our neighbors are the experts. We don't have to go outside ourselves. We trust in the Holy Spirit and then realize that changes take time. One of the clients I work with in coaching, working through her discernment, she goes, I want it to be like what I thought Noom, the weight loss online app, would be like. I could just download the app and instantly I'd be losing weight. It takes engagement and good, deep work. And this is looking for God's glory, of God's presence already at work and how we're being called. And that's the naming of the shifts. But that's when you become innovative together as a congregation. How does spirituality come in? I'm going to click these all in, everyone, just because I did set the timer and boy, it goes a lot faster. In the midst of that slide, everyone, you can see on the top, here are, who are we? Who's our neighbor? And it's like a funnel. Here are the lenses that we have sifted this data through as we collected. But what's permeating all in that funnel that is helping us to get clarity are the spiritual discernment that we've done, those practices, the welcoming prayer, the Jesus prayer, Visio Divina, Lectio Divina, whatever has gravitated well towards your group. And coming down through that funnel is what you receive a vocation. Back to that personal, what does that mean? Oftentimes when you're such a leader in this, it means that you've got to dance on the dance floor. It means you've got to go up to the balcony. It means you're disarming some of the control mechanisms. And it also means you will have some casualties. I've had to return to this over and over and over, because when that change happens, there is some difficulty. There's a lot of joy, but a lot of difficulty. And lastly, I know when we break into our groups, I'll share this a little bit more, but here's where I became so excited. What could you do in that interim? You could ask those questions and help them to do that wonderful deep research with deep, deep listening. Who are we? Who are our neighbors? How's the Holy Spirit calling us? And what lenses are there? And keep everything framed in spiritual practices, and even start to dabble in those small experiments. I can't imagine what it would be like. Well, I can imagine. It'd be utter joy to enter a congregation that didn't put everything on pause, but that was generating in the spirit, in the in-between, so that they're ready to take off in between. So thank you, everyone. You're on mute, Keith.
Which is so unusual to be on mute. Anyway, thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that. Marissa?
Hi, everyone. Wonderful to be with you today. My name is Pastor Marissa Harrison, and I serve with Good Soil Lutheran Ministries in Rocky River, which is a suburb of the Cleveland, Ohio area. As Keith mentioned before, Good Soil is the product of a merger of two former ELCA congregations that came together in 2018. I'd like to share a little bit about that context before I share some examples of concrete, innovative strategies that we've been employing. So just a few minutes of background before we dive into those examples. There are many layers as a part of this call. So Good Soil came together in February of 2018. And then about 6 months later, the pastor that they were previously in shared ministry with, sharing as a pastor who brought them together as Good Soil, then took another call about 6 months later after they came together. So that was a transition point. Of course, they got in an interim, started the call process, and then in spring of 2019, got an unsolicited offer to buy one of the church buildings. So prior to that, Good Soil had been worshiping every other week in one or the other of the congregations. And then all of a sudden had an offer for one of the buildings to be purchased. So after some discernment in late summer of 2019, then one of those buildings was sold, and that congregation moved many of its belongings into the other congregation, forming one rooted community in that location. Then they started interviewing candidates. That's when I was in conversation with Good Soil, fall of 2019. And then we all know what happened in spring of 2020. So there were all of these chapters and layers of transition, grief, change, before even coming together as pastor and people. The first year, for those of you who are in ministry settings, you know that offered a lot of opportunities for trying new things and being flexible and leaning into that nimbleness of being, trying to faithfully be church in a very uncertain time. So we, like many congregations across the ELCA and across the world, really, tried to build up a live stream presence when we didn't have one before. I started in May of 2020. The congregational vote was taken over FM transmitter. So that even in and of itself was a way to try something new and experiment in a new way, doing the work of being church together, but having to find new ways to do that and gather in that way. So my whole first year with Good Soil was with an empty sanctuary, preaching to a camera. We did online getting to know you Zoom events and Bible studies, lots of phone calls, but we didn't come back to in-person worship for a whole year. And we paired that with my installation service, and that gave us the opportunity to have a date to work towards and do particular milestones of planning before then. One of the really helpful things that we did together was a facility audit, and I am willing to share that resource with anyone who might need it. I know our contact information will be shared. We took a group of people through the building itself, tried to use fresh eyes, filled out a worksheet. One of the questions, of course, is when you walk into a room, what decade does it feel like you've walked into? All of those good questions to pay attention to. That, in addition to other ways that we prepared for that event, we ended up doing some blessing, retiring, honoring of things within the church. You know how things collect in church buildings. We identified some of those items that needed to be retired and honored and then taken down, like a thimble collection on the wall, things like that. And then shared some of the stories that were behind those items as well, and found out that one of the people from one of the legacy congregations was actually baptized at one of the predecessor mergers from a former merger in the 50s of one of the other congregations. And they had that link together and didn't even know it. So there were lots of things that went into preparing for getting back to in-person worship. But of course, that was just step one. The real work, or more work, I suppose, was intentionally trying to continue to form that identity together. Some of you who may have worked in mergers or two-point parish ministries, my first call was in a two-point parish in rural Indiana. So coming to Good Soil kind of felt like the next iteration or chapter of that. But there's so much work that has to be done around forming identity, around building community and building trust, and moving forward in mission together. And some of the questions that Pastor Sarah mentioned in her presentation, of course, apply in that process as well. But we started doing some of that work. One of the things that was helpful for us was a history exercise, just getting groups together for community summer dinners in people's homes. And this is also a resource I'm willing to share for those of you who'd like to see it. We had a timeline on top for people to share personal timeline milestones in their life, because of course people need to go know one another. Good Soil currently is about 1/3 one of the predecessor congregations, another third one of the predecessor congregations, and then 1/3 of new folks. New people who have joined Good Soil. We've had 15 new members since I've joined, just coming. You never know who's hungry for worship, and pandemic gave us a lot of opportunities to reach out to people who were wondering about the spiritual dimension of life, of course, and sharing our particular story from that Lutheran Christian perspective. But we had this mix of people who needed to get to know one another. So that history exercise had a timeline on the top and a timeline on the bottom, with both churches kind of merging into one, and people would divide into groups and then share with partners not only about their personal timeline, but also important events to the congregation for them, and also things that they appreciated about the congregation, to try to cultivate gratitude and a sense of looking at what we do have and what we're grateful for. Another part of that was helpful was asking, a fill in the blank question. Good Soil was, Good Soil is now, Good Soil hopes to be in the future. And then gathering together as a large group and sharing that. And there were some really helpful pieces and reflections that came out of that, in addition to giving people a chance just to process through some of that grief, layered grief, of course, based on what I previously described. So the history exercise was a helpful thing that we did. Another concrete innovation that really has been most fruitful in our context has been inviting people to share their stories and go deeper. I recently was at a training, and the facilitator said that there are different levels of sharing and communication. Level one is the weather, is the how many children do you have, is the topical stuff that all of us do on a regular basis. Level two goes deeper. Level two engages the more tender pieces of who we are and how faith relates to that. Level two might be a question like, what's the most interesting thing that happened to you this summer and why? It's still accessible, but it does move a little bit further in that vulnerability and helps people to connect when they share together. So we at Good Soil have been employing this in a number of different ways. During the worship service is a main one. We have sermon reflection questions a lot of the time, not every week, but I'd say at least 75% of the Sundays will have some sort of reflection question. That can be folded into the sermon itself. That can be something at the beginning of the service itself. I'd like to share a few examples of what those questions might sound like. In Lent of this year, we did a series called God is on the Move. And then every day, every Sunday in the season of Lent, we had some sermon reflection question that connected to the sermon. People would then stop in the middle of worship and pair together groups of 2 or 3 to share questions like, describe a wilderness time in your life, a time of transition or struggle or uncertainty. How was Jesus present with you in that wilderness time? Or another week was describe a time when you felt God's unconditional, gracious, or protective love through a mother or a mom-like figure in your life. You might know what scripture that connects to in the season of Lent, the mother hen and Jesus in Jerusalem. Or a third example, another question was, describe a time in your life that seemed unfruitful. How did God eventually bring forth new life, new opportunities, or new growth out of that time? So the idea is to set aside time, even during the worship service, for people to share with one another. We did that during Lent. Another time of the liturgical year that we've done that is Stewardship. For those of you who haven't read the book Abundance by Mike Ward or participated in building a culture of generosity, highly recommended. That made a big difference for Good Soil as well. So often stewardship is a growth area in congregations that are in transition. And we read the Abundance book as a council, chapter by chapter, discussing it, and then tried the Building a Culture of Generosity initiative. And one of the things that they emphasize there too is sharing stories. What are the stories of impact? How are people's lives being changed by the ministry? Who taught you about generosity? And so in the season of stewardship, we started each Sunday in our stewardship year, or in our stewardship emphasis, inviting people at the beginning of the service to turn to someone and share about who taught them generosity, or sharing a story of when they received overwhelming, unexpected generosity, or when they maybe did that for someone else, and just talking about the ways that we're putting our faith in action and that we experience God at work in our lives every day. Then in the season of Advent, we did something called Advent Vocational Interviews. So we took a pause during the offering time to invite someone up and share about the ways in which they live out their faith in their daily life, in their jobs. Very easy, accessible questions. Things like, what do you like about your job? What's challenging about your job? How do you feel like you live out your faith in that context? And then what can we be praying for you for? And so someone would share these things, and often it just felt like the mood in church changed, like there's something in the room there when those stories are being put out in the open in a public way, and then to be able to pray as a congregation for that person who is willing to come up and share was always very powerful too. Some ways that we've incorporated story sharing into areas outside of worship. We've done potlucks, and instead of just gathering together to eat, we've put discussion questions underneath the placemat. Should have seen the look on their faces, thought they were just going to eat, and then pull up the placemat over and whoop, there's a discussion question. You know that this is a part of what we do together to deepen our relationships and build this sense of community, because so much after the pandemic, there were so many people who were feeling isolated, people coming to church looking for community, looking for Christ-centered community. And we need to start talking about that more to go deeper, growing in faith and growing in our relationships with each other. Another way that we did it outside of worship story sharing was through Lenten small groups. So we instead of doing midweek Lenten worship, did small groups, Lenten small groups. And it does not have to be rocket science. It's as easy as starting off with highs, lows, and God moments, moving into an I notice, I wonder devotional practice, and then praying for one another, continuing to deepen those relationships, especially in a merger consolidation sort of a context. And then finally, I wanted to share one more resource that we've used that's been helpful. Spirituality is a huge part of what it means to grow in vitality. You all know this as leaders in the church, all kinds of growth, whether it's new leaders in new positions, or growing young, or growing in generosity and stewardship, or even growing in numbers, which is often the last kind of growth. Those growth areas are always grounded first in spiritual growth. And so starting every kind of meeting, property meeting to council meetings, with 15 to 20 minutes of devotions. The resource that's been helpful for us on council is a book called Growing Together, Spiritual Exercises for Church Communities by Harold Epley and Rochelle Melander. That's been a helpful one for us. And then trying to make sure that each and every meeting is started with that sharing, growing in devotion together. And something that we've also created is a little wallet-sized highs, lows, and God moments, so that even at the ladies' breakfast once a month, the ladies can pull out those wallet-sized cards and use them together. As I close here, because we need to transition to our next panelist, I just wanted to share that a lot of what I have said has been internally focused. And I think that points to a need, especially for churches that have experienced a merger or consolidation, that the internal work has to happen first so that people can be welcomed into a community, so that those new folks can feel welcomed into a place that feels vital and vibrant, doing that important work together. And Good Soil will be moving into this next year into a strategic visioning process. We'll continue in some community leader conversations and listening campaigns in the community, trying to cultivate some of that too. There's a few other details that I'd like to share, but we need to transition to our next person. Again, happy to be here, and thank you for giving me a chance to share.
Thank you so much, Marissa. Sometimes we get to thinking that there isn't exciting stuff happening in the church. Isn't it wonderful to hear there is? Want to invite Alan.
Well, good afternoon and thank you. I'm honored to be a part of this panel as well today. My name is Pastor Alan Blankenfeld. I serve as the Rural Ministry Liaison to the South Dakota Synod, and I'll explain more about that in a couple minutes. It's ministry that's exciting for me and for the Synod, but a lot different than a lot of the ministries you're in. A little bit about me. My wife and I have been married for coming up on 41 years. We've got 3 grown children, 7 grandkids scattered across the US. But I wasn't always a pastor. I'm a second career pastor. I actually farmed in South Dakota for 33 years before I was ordained in January of 2016. And over the course of my farming years, I served numerous times on a church council at our small 2-point country parish. And it was interesting to me to hear over and over again that the bishop and the synod don't care about us. You know, a lot of small congregations feel that way, that they're overlooked and that nobody cares. And I started thinking about that, and it was about a year ago that I started a conversation with the bishop of the South Dakota Synod. And in that conversation, this position was formed. Wasn't any, it was something new to the Synod. Actually, I thought I was kind of laying groundwork for maybe a couple of years down the road. But no, a few months later, the bishop called and said her and the Synod Council had created a new position, and she called me to serve on it. It's kind of a work in progress. So what I do is I go out into the communities where the bishop and her associate who works with candidacy send me, and I spend 2 weeks in the community. I'm their pastor for 2 weeks. And since this started mid-January, I've been in 9 communities and 16 churches across South Dakota. And it's truly been a blessing. But what I do is I go in there, I meet with people, I lead worship and preach the 2 Sundays I'm there. If it's during Lent, I take care of Lenten services, any pastoral needs that they have. I've done everything from a baptism to First Communion classes. And actually, I hate to say this, but the last 2 I've been in, I had to do 2 funerals, both for 38-year-old mothers who died of cancer. So I never know what I'm going to walk into, nor do you as a pastor. I understand that. I also meet with the various groups in the church. The church council, of course, the WELCA. There's a vast amount of information you can gain from the WELCA and quilters. The youth group, Sunday school, any group within the church. And I start out my first Sunday there by sharing my story. And it's kind of interesting, and a lot of people don't understand this when I tell them, but when I had introduced myself as staff of the Synod, it's like there's a wall between the congregation and me. And once I tell them my story that I farmed for all those years, you can just feel that just dissolve away. And it's almost like, well, you're one of us is the feeling I get. And I've actually had people tell me that. Well, you're not a typical pastor, you're one of us. And I think that opens a lot of doors to some really good conversations. I share with the people that I will share my story with you, and then I would like you to share yours with me. And in a lot of cases, I've been invited to a lot of farms and ranches where they do share a lot of their stories. I also travel around within the community itself and talk to, the sheriff, the local ag bankers, businesses, to get a feel for the community and what it's all about. And for me, it's just a way to become involved and to get the pulse of the community. One of the communities I was in, like 2 or 3 days after I was there was a death of a 20-year-old in a car accident. And even though they weren't a member of the church I was serving in at that time, I got a phone call to come to the school. And I did. I went up and spent an afternoon. There were a lot of students that wanted to talk, a lot of staff that wanted to talk, and just a way to, give the community a big hug and let them know that there was somebody there that cared about them. And it's interesting that even though I said earlier, there's this feeling of disconnect between churches and the synod. Every church I've been in at some point in the visit has said, okay, the bishop and the synod really do care about us. And so that's kind of neat to be a part of that. I've gone into congregations that are just at the beginning of their period of transforming or their, transitioning. And I've also been in congregations that have been several years that they've been without a pastor. And so it's kind of different to sit down with them and to start peeling back the layers of who they are, more importantly, whose they are, and then also to talk about, what their mission is and what their future looks like. Because so many churches, I think, I don't know, they just look at their future as all about themselves, and they need to look beyond that. I also, part of my job is to visit with lay leaders. In South Dakota, we do have quite a few lay leaders that serve our rural congregations, just because it's really difficult to get clergy to go into some of our remote areas. And I think it's unfortunate that a lot of pastors will pull out a map and they'll look at, the last community I was just in, Buffalo, South Dakota. If you pull out your map of South Dakota and look in the very northwest corner of the state, it's the last town you'll find. And a lot of people won't go there. It's like, oh no, they're in the middle of nowhere. But I think it was interesting, while my wife and I were in that community, we had lunch with a ranch couple. They were celebrating, it was Labor Day, and they had their big celebration. And the rancher made an interesting comment. He said, everybody looks at this community and says, we're in the middle of nowhere. And there's no Walmart here. He said, you know what? We can have Walmart and Amazon boxes on our doorstep out at the porch within 2, 3, 4 days. We don't need to physically walk in those stores. And he said, but most people don't give us a chance. And I think that's very true. So what we're doing in South Dakota, and I know other synods have done similar things, we're putting together a lay academy, we're calling it. It's a way to get our lay people better trained to serve in congregations, whether they are synodically authorized or not. It kind of depends on the situations, and to give them the opportunity. And so the bishop and I, along with Luther and Wartburg seminaries, and also some of our neighboring synods, are working together to put together this lay academy, where we'll cover a lot of different things. from preaching, Old and New Testament, what it is to be Lutheran. So Lutheran 101, worship, visitation, and the goal is just to better equip the lay people to give them more confidence in what they're doing. And I think it's interesting how some of the lay people I've come into contact with, how their experience and how the Holy Spirit is working through them. One of them, they're both second career. The one is an author and a professional speaker, and yet she knew there was something missing in her life. And she actually now is synodically authorized, is serving 2 small rural congregations, and is a freshman at Luther Seminary. Another lady who second career, early retired from teaching. She is now, when I visited with her and said, have you ever thought about seminary? And it's like, no, I don't ever want to do that. I said, okay, how about some lay leadership classes? Sure. Well, she took the first one. She's also synodically authorized now and is serving 2 small rural congregations. And the last time I talked to her, she goes, hey, Pastor Allen, I need to know some other lay classes I can take. I want to learn more. And so, we're putting this together in hopes that we can do that. And part of my job now too will be to oversee and to walk alongside our lay leaders as well. And I think it's fun for me to see the Holy Spirit at work in these rural communities. They sometimes don't think they have a lot to offer. And it's fun for me to point out to them that they do have a lot to offer, and that they do have a future. And to, everybody, you and I, along with these congregations, it's scary to walk into an unknown future because none of us knows what tomorrow holds for any of us. But yet when they have someone that walks with them, it's a little less scary. And so that's part of what I get to do. The joy I get to have is to walk with them. Like I said, through the things I've done in these churches, we've laughed together and we've cried together and everything in between. I do stay in touch with them. I keep reaching back to them, and I'm thrilled to be able to tell you today that of the 9 communities that I've been in right now, half of them are interviewing and are in the process of calling a pastor. So it's been really good. It's been a blessing for me. I feel truly blessed every time I come away from one of my assignments. Another thing we're doing here in the South Dakota Synod is the bishop has put together a rural strategy roundtable where we are meeting, by we, I mean myself and another pastor are co-facilitating. And South Dakota has 7 conferences. And so we've got a person from every conference, and we're strategizing of what, we talk about what rural ministry was in the past, what we are presently, and then we move to what the future holds for us, because we know rural ministry is changing. As farms and ranches get bigger and bigger and families get smaller, we all know what's happened in our church attendance, and in rural congregations, that's no different. And it's even more scary for them, I think. So again, that's some of the things I do. I'd love to visit with you more about it. And I'm truly excited and blessed about what I have to do and what I am doing. And when I'm done with my visit, then I meet with the bishop and her associate as we then brainstorm about the community and what it is we can do there to be the synod with them and to walk with them in their journey to get a new pastor. So thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I can see how important that relationship building with those who think they're really on the outs and being able to go out there would be. So thank you for sharing that story and again being a part. I'm going to Beth Marie. I see you got here. I'm going to invite you to to share now. We told all kinds of great stuff about you before, so you're you know.
Well, it's good to be here. I am Beth Marie Halverson from Houston, Texas. And in describing my ministry, I was recently asked at a retreat, a staff retreat, by the consultant to describe my ministry in one phrase, as if in an elevator conversation. And I responded to help people navigate massive, risky transitions. And the leader retorted, if most people heard your response, they would get off at the next floor. But in 2018, the bishop sent me as an interim to a congregation where a conflict had led both the pastor and quite a few members to leave the church yet again. And 40 years ago, this congregation had been the largest in our synod, with 3 full-time pastors. But then the decline began. Attempts at mission renewal were punctuated by misconduct and conflict, both by pastors and laity. And now the redevelopment phase had come to a disastrous end. Well, when I arrived, I felt that maybe that fit and that itch of the spirit, that strange sense of the spirit, to serve there. And they only worship 30, maybe 30 to 35 people a Sunday. And the bishop, I would say that the bishop's office seemed to think that it was most likely time to close this congregation, and I basically agreed. However, it is 2022, and I am still at this congregation, and worship attendance is even lower. People have died, have moved away, and many are struggling with health issues. So what is distinctive about this ministry? Good question. I would say that we faced reality. And throughout the process, and you'll hear it unfold, we had various types of mutual listening sessions where we always named where we were. And the first round was with the redevelopment process blowing up, and we named it the derailment. But naming and then continuing to name where we were kept us grounded in reality. The other thing to me that was important was that I strongly encouraged honesty about emotions during these mutual ministry sessions, especially in the beginning and at critical junctures. People were expected to articulate emotions and could only briefly describe the context. The focus was sharing and naming the emotions, and every feeling was honored, and I wrote it on the whiteboard. Now, for that first round of mutual listening sessions dealing with the derailment, the congregants were quite articulate. Of the 46 different emotions listed on that board, 44 of them I will leave to your imagination, okay? 44. However, I kept always this part of the listening session going until I could finally hear something else. And in this instance, only when thankful and maybe hopeful finally arose would I know that we could take the next needed step into the listening session. But I think there is a power to actually write down and honor all the varied emotions, because people do not feel as alone. They can accept emotions as natural and covering a wide spectrum, which means that sometimes someone can hold contradictory feelings at the same time within themselves. And when people feel heard, I think that they begin to hear other perspectives. So facing reality, naming it, as well as naming our emotions, was essential to help us ask, How do we respond? What do we need to do next? And we journeyed from one wilderness to another wilderness to yet another. And we continued to hold these mutual listening sessions. We even had one yesterday. And I would have to also emphasize that learning, that we were always having to learn something. And this was a very strong component in these gatherings. But you can just listen to the progression from the derailment as we faced reality and raised new questions. So we cannot continue on as is and be good stewards of our lovely campus. We do not have the capacity, the energy, or the numbers to create a sustainable vision here. How can we leave a legacy? Because we have a very unique location with 5 buildings, 4+ acres, trees, gardens in the middle of Houston. With whom can we have conversations? What would happen if we asked a sister congregation to help? If we merge with a stronger congregation, can we indeed actually become better together? Which is the name of a book. Will they think it's possible, feasible, desirable? Do we? But in facing reality, encouraging honesty about emotions, developing yet the next set of questions, continuing to learn, we kept on taking steps. Some of them panned out, some of them did not. But why am I still here at this congregation? I thought I would have been done in the fall of 2019. We knew we needed significant partners, and they would have to also be community partners. So we had substantial conversations both with the Roman Catholic Church as well as Upbring, which is Lutheran Social Services here, but they did not work out for very valid reasons. However, Christ the King Lutheran Church, which is near Rice University, maybe 20 minutes away, kind of hung in there with us. And together our church councils decided to explore merging with our congregation and campus being incorporated into their ministry, and with them providing the needed capacity and energy to create a sustainable vision at this campus. Now, this relationship persevered. It persevered through COVID, through the Texas winter freeze, through the resignation of their senior pastor because of his wife's fatal illness, through the resignation of the associate pastor, and through deaths and moves of members. Timelines were adjusted out again and again, and it seemed like, when is this going to happen? But I can say now that we continue to stay together. And at the end of the year, we will be fully integrated as one congregation. And the congregation that I came to serve is still here. The campus I came to serve is still here also, because a sister congregation responded to our request for help. And they saw possibility. They understood the changing world and changing church, and they were willing to take a massive risk. Now, I want you to note that this is not about them filling our pews. Though the remaining few people continue to worship, learn, serve, and care, and I would have to say with joy, they do this. And those are my cats fighting, if you hear something. This instead is a rebirth of the entire campus, which is being shaped by a strategic plan in which we engaged together. Christ the King did hire Triangle 2, which has also been used by Metro New York Synod, as well as other congregations, the YMCA of Houston, to introduce a strategic plan, to gather all the data, the patterns from data. We actually have 800 pages of community and community and congregational surveys, conversations, and demographics. And they were also hired simply to keep our process actionable. But what I think is important is to recognize is that this entire strategic process emerged from the people. We have Triangle 2 guiding us, but it's emerging from the people and not the pastors. Ironically, though Christ the King has 3 deacons, church admin, youth and family, music, none of the 3 pastors serving these 2 campuses are regularly called or settled pastors. I am the transitional pastor now at what is known as the West Campus. Mandy Dare is the interim senior pastor, and Sergio Rodriguez is under a term call to serve the Latina community and Rice Campus. But I think what's important to note is what our role as pastors was and is, and that it's not to declare to people what's going to happen. It's instead for us to be listening and learning. We definitely help shape the questions for surveys, for sessions, for conversations. We help point out patterns, but we also name the tensions that need to be addressed and figure out a way for us to do that. And we nuance phrasing when needed. So the vision is arising from the people in the community and the congregation. Now, 3 strategic themes have emerged for us: that of becoming a spiritual home, acting justly, and engaging in technical innovation. We've developed objectives under each one of those themes, and now we're working on the action steps for the next 3 years, which to start in January. And it's an amazing process. But I think what's important and what has been told me as I've talked, that this is both organic, but it's also intentional. It is very spiritual, but it's also accountable. And those are key words that have shaped this process. Now, what's going to happen at this campus where I still serve? I wish I could say. To help integrate the 2 campuses, a steering committee was formed, and we have 5 different teams: legal and governance, work processes, funding sources and strategies, site development, and then ministry, which they consider to be the most important one, and that is the one that I chair for both campuses. So what I can say is that our steering committee is recommending, based on what are our critical needs right now, that we will have capital investment into our grounds, because they're very unique, the sanctuary, and what is known as the education building, where Emmaus Spirituality Center is now housed and who has now become a partner on this campus with us. However, the conversation about future potential ministries is actually beginning in October. So I kind of wish you could ask me this in a month or 2, but I do know that the ministry team has made, we have made 5 recommendations to the steering committee, which will then go to the council and which will then go to the congregation by the end of the year, about listening to the community, developing partnerships with Emmaus, and exploring significant ministries. And one of them happens actually to be an Abrahamic Faith Center, where Jews, Muslims, and Christians would all be on the same site, working towards the common good, being able to say, hey, we're different, but we are united also. We also know that there is not any kind of institution providing dementia adult daycare. We have recognized that there is also a dearth in our section of Houston where there could be an expansion of arts, music, and theater for smaller groups. Who knows? As I said before, we're only beginning this process in October. But what I can say without a doubt is that we will be pouring our resources into training people to know how to be in relationship with themselves, with creation, with others, and with God. Now, spirituality has informed this ministry. It is a gigantic risk. And we will not know what will actually happen for a couple of years. And we do have timetables for checking in, but we still feel compelled to try. I cannot tell you, there are times that I wonder about our hubris, our arrogance in thinking that rebirth can happen. No, to what degree are we in denial about the state of the congregation, the state of the church? Have we misread the Spirit? I will sometimes ask myself these questions. I think that's natural, but yet I continue to be pulled back from doubt and exhaustion sometimes to hope and excitement because of the people who are lending their energy, their creativity and intentionality, and because of that strange pull of the Holy Spirit. So why would a campus entrust themselves, their money, their campus, their ministry, their legacy to another congregation who in many regards is unknown to them? I have to say that spirituality is undeniably foundational to this whole process. I would like to be able to share my screen. So I'm going to do that now. And as I have done in other congregations, I seek to embody for myself what I call centered flexibility. This is my doctoral work, which is simple, but not simpler. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote that a strong person lives in the living blend of strongly marked opposites. So Jesus showed both humility, wash feet, gut level compassion, and boldness, crossing socially accepted boundaries, speaking truth to power. And Jesus both exhibited tenacity, setting his face to go to Jerusalem, managing resistance, accomplishing something, and surrender, not my will, but your will. I choose to lay down my life for my friends. Now, many of my interims have dealt with sexual misconduct, destructive conflict, decline, and the need for spiritual and missional renewal. And I would have to say that centered flexibility has always played some part. Listening sessions, sermons, assessments, Bible studies. I've graphed over 60 Bible stories with an understanding of human behavior in the ancient world, etc. But it helps to capture the fullness of how we are called to respond to situations as they continue to unfold. We know this. Think of the boldness of wanting to be a disciple. But what that means is the surrender of denying ourselves. It's the humility to take up the cross. It's the tenacity to follow without knowing exactly what's going to happen. Jesus calls us to focus on all of these 4 virtues. None of us are left off the hook for any one of them. But you'll notice that in the congregation, the interim that I was called to serve in 2018, the focus has honestly been on surrender, being aware, being vulnerable with emotions, accepting the reality in front of us, kind of reassessing things and asking new questions, and always kind of surrendering to what is God's call. But I hope that you heard, even as I told the story, but that was never the only focus, because the consul and others, we had to take up another space. You could hear the humility of just learning and listening and seeking help. The tenacity of research, deep research and making resources. And the boldness of having just that gutsy grace where you observe clearly and you speak the truth. And it comes back around to the surrender, and we have to repeat that cycle again and again. And that is what ends up moving us forward by making sure that we have been embodying all of those virtues. As I said before, people have described this as they have observed it, and we have this document, a lot of this documented from derailment to the merger. It's been organic, but it's been intentional. There's a humble boldness. It's been spiritual, but it's been accountable as we move between the marked opposites of surrender and tenacity. Throughout this whole process, we first used it ourselves. It greatly shaped our congregation so that we could surrender and ask for help from this congregation. But what I find interesting is that we entered the strategic process. They asked me to begin it, and I wrote a prayer based for our initial summit, based on the creative tensions between the quadrants of centered flexibility. And then people asked if we could post it in the newsletter, if we could open all listening sessions with it. And it was used at the beginning of the congregational vote on the strategic plan. And now what I find interesting is that that prayer was about a half a page long, but it showed the fullness of depth without rigidity and the breadth without superficiality. And people kept on being drawn to it because sometimes it's not the quick answer. You have to tease it out. And this fall, what Christ the King has asked me to do, and we recognize, I said, we became aware of the tensions that we have to address, is that they gave me the task that I was to develop criteria to engage each other on matters about which we do not immediately agree. And I said, it's not possible. I'm not going to develop criteria and stick it on a wall and think that it's going to change the culture. It will not. So what we are doing instead is that I am posting those 4 virtues with small groups. And I'm asking the people to flesh out, what does it mean for how you will behave when you're in a difficult conversation upon which people strongly disagree? And calling them to account that they have to be willing to engage all of those different kind of behaviors as shaped by those 4 virtues. And the other thing that I've noticed, because I've seen it in other congregations, is that
Beth Marie, I don't mean to interrupt, but we're gonna have to. There's going to be more time in the breakout, but
I'm done. That was actually my last sentence. Is that
okay? I'm sorry.
I couldn't see the time up there. The vocabulary to hold each other accountable.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. So Kurt, you go ahead and you got time.
Okay, just as long as I don't lose my lunch break.
No.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon if you're in some other time zone that's later than me. It is good to be with you. I am a fellow trained interim, though my transitional ministry that's been going on for the last 6 years has been in specifically redevelopment at Living Christ Lutheran Church in Flagstaff, Arizona, part of the Grand Canyon Synod. The Living Christ basically formed in the late 80s out on the northeast side of Flagstaff, the gateway to the Grand Canyon. And it built out there because that's where the new growth was all expected to happen. And as it turns out, a couple of years after they built there, the city said, well, we are going to change all of our plans for growth because we are looking at a major water shortage. We are in the midst of a 25-year drought, mega drought. And so it turns out that was problematic to begin with, but the congregation still persisted and it grew and all of that. But interestingly enough, it never actually reached out into the immediate neighborhoods it was located in. And so even though it was booming, it went through a transition. And while it had a booming youth ministry, it kind of dwindled away. And certain pastors that were very influential moved on to other locations, and suddenly they found themselves after 25 years or so, in other words, about the mid-teens of 20s, they were at the point where you either close or you go through redevelopment. And they decided they had enough energy and oomph to say, we're going to do it. We're going to do redevelopment. And so I was called, and I started September 1st of 2016. And fortunately, they had a good interim who helped them work through some of their things, getting some of their financial ordeals in order. But also they, on their own leadership, undertook a study about discipleship, needing to move away from the whole notion of membership into discipleship of, I've done my little part, now it's somebody else's turn to, we're all in this together. We've all been given gifts of the Holy Spirit. God is calling us in our baptisms as disciples. It's time to carry our cross, and we're gonna make the most of this. And so I was blessed and fortunate to be able to walk into that kind of a situation where I didn't have to really start off with an old model and say, okay, folks, let's try and redevelop from a very base. So I'm thankful for my predecessor for that. But really, after taking some time to sort of get to know the congregation, because redevelopment ministry on average takes 7 to 11 years. So this was not something that was going to happen overnight. And the congregation knew that and understood it. And so it was going to be a long haul of sorts. So after an initial 6 months of getting to know each other better, doing some various fun things, we sat down and said, okay, what are our strengths? What's our DNA? What's our core identity? Who are we about? What are the things that we recognize that they're old and need to be let go? What new things are we needing to do? Are there certain weaknesses that we need to address? And basically through that work, it was a recognition that we needed to do a better job of reconnecting to the neighborhood around us. Even though they'd been in the neighborhood for over 30 years, there had never been really any major, hey, neighbor, how are you? Let me introduce myself to you. And also part of the core identity of the congregation was being open and affirming of LGBTQ people. Now, you may have heard in the initial description here that it was the LGBTQIA2S+. I think generally now we know the LGBTQ, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer. I is intersex, A is asexual, 2S is not generally something that gets out and around, but we are located just off of the Navajo and Hopi reservations. And 2S stands for Two-Spirit, which is the Native American general designation for their own gender identity and sexual identity, or SGM, sexual and gender minority identities. And that's a whole nother conversation there that I'm not going to get into, but just realizing that was part of the context. We have Native Americans who are attending the congregation, and so they have been for the most part homeless, and so there's a whole shifting dynamic there. So there was getting to know the neighborhood, the LGBTQ, and there was also sort of a growing sense of justice, wanting to be about justice. Oh, another thing too about the whole LGBTQ thing is that Flagstaff, most people don't know this, is 25 to 30% LGBTQ. And a lot of that is because of the local university, Northern Arizona University. It has a reputation of being open and affirming as well. And so that attracts, it's seen as a safe campus then. And so if it's safe, people come. So there was also that part of the mixture. And so understanding that we had some of these strengths, we then began reaching out in the neighborhood. And in terms of starting to build some of those relationships and understanding what the needs were in the community, one of the things that we learned about the Flagstaff community is that half of the housing is not available for use by the residents. Half. So 1/4 of all the housing available here is taken up either by Airbnbs, VRBOs, kind of a thing. So it's rental in that sense, and therefore expensive. Or it's people's summer homes, mostly from Phoenix area, people trying to escape the heat, going up during the summer, or the summertime, where in Flagstaff, where it's much cooler because we're at 7,000 feet and it's 25 degrees cooler. And so that was another just temporary, people using housing that's only temporary, and it's left empty for the most of the rest of the year. And so that left a lot of housing, or limited amounts of housing for a growing population. And the neighborhood we were specifically in had a very high rental rate. It's a lot of not mobile homes, although that could be called. It's I just blanked out of the name. Oh well, I'll come up with it later. But not regular housing, modular housing that's brought in and reconstructed, but not mobile homes. So at any rate, but the rents here in Flagstaff are ridiculous. And housing values, of course, were very sky high simply because of demand relative to what's available. And so we realized that there was a need and a calling upon our hearts and some sense of a strength in this, but at the exact same time, we just didn't have it all by ourselves. And so we understood that there was a ministry here that needed to happen because there was this overlap of need and strengths and calling, but we didn't have enough ourselves. And so we began reaching out to other people in the wider Flagstaff community. And we ended up joining up with a community organizing group called Northern Arizona Interfaith Council. And through that ecumenical group, we discovered that there are other people that were maybe interested in doing this work with us, but they didn't have enough people to try and make it happen or enough expertise. And so we started pooling more of our resources together that way. And then along the way, then we started doing more things with the LGBTQ. And so we started up a partnership with the local Pride organization. And while the Living Christ had been attending the annual Pride event, we also then became a sponsor. We took the next step up and became a presence in the Flagstaff community at this Pride event. And when the Living Christ first started attending, people were like, uh-oh, it's a church at the Pride event. This can't be good. And people would intentionally walk far around the place. But after a while, they began to realize that, no, we were legitimately there, not for some sort of a conversion experience of getting you to convert to being straight or something like that, that we were truly open and affirming. And that then we slowly began building a community reputation then that way as well. So along the way, we've been attracting new members, but at the exact same time, because this is such a transition, that there were some folks like, you know what, I don't want to be involved in this. And they moved off to our sister congregation, to some other congregation. Others just simply happened to move out of town. It wasn't anything against us. But it was, in some ways, we were trading water. We were moving one step forward and getting pushed back with the tide or something like that. And again, realizing that we were needing to do more experimentation, adaptation, and we began then trying to do dinner church. And that started to get some traction too. We were able to start inviting in new folks. And that was all starting to, this looks like it might be something. And then, well, that was Lenten 2020, and we all know what happened, a couple of weeks later. Pandemic hit and everything all shut down, including dinner church. So there was some challenges there. But one of the things that had happened is that when I first started, we began publishing our worship services online, mostly just the sermons. And, we get like 30 hits a week. It wasn't much of anything, but we kept at it. we really weren't trying to do anything particular other than, if we plant some seeds and people come across this, great. Well, when the pandemic hit and everybody was going online, it was like, well, hey, we already know what we're doing. But along the way, we discovered, well, it was like, sure, it was initially 30, and then we all went online and we started watching, so it was 70 or 80. And then it just kept growing. And it was like 110 or 120. And a few months later, it was 140. And then it was 200. And now we're at the point where we're reaching 800 to 850 different people any given Sunday. And we have people that are watching us on every single continent on the planet except for Antarctica. And we've also began, as part of our outreach, we started translating the sermon and dubbing it into Spanish. And so about a third of the folks that we're reaching are Spanish speakers. And the cost to do this is very minimal. I mean, $1 a day a week, that kind of a thing. It's not including the technology we had to invest in to upgrade and all of that. But just simply doing this, it's because we're reaching really far out, we're not unfortunately really being able to build those more personal connections as a result. But because the other thing too, we also discovered is that during the pandemic, part of the growth we think that was happening was because LGBTQ people were watching online, but still don't feel really safe enough to end up in churches yet again. And especially when we were just starting to come out of the pandemic, that's when a lot of anti-LGBTQ legislation started appearing. There were attacks, now monkeypox, blah, blah, blah. And so it's still that one step forward, getting pushed back by some tide. But we continue to do this faithfully. And part of the reason why we're continuing to do this is because of ecumenical partnerships. During the pandemic, we just simply decided, you know what? Having a building the size that we have with the mortgage that we have just doesn't make any sense for us, especially since just before the pandemic, and we were doing the outreach, we were discovering a lot of people were saying, you know what, you're just too far out of town for us. And so now we have sold our building. We've moved into more towards the center of town. We haven't moved to suburbia. We've moved into the center of town onto the NAU campus. And we rent space then with the ecumenical campus ministry groups, which we already had lots of interactions with because we were doing ecumenical outreach on the campus. And I also happen to be the Lutheran/Episcopal joint ecumenical campus ministry here too. So it is just partnerships built with partnerships built with partnerships, and that together, or I mean, separately, we would not be able to do what we're doing. But in little ways, we've been able to support each other, and that helps sustain us, that we have strengths and gifts that we didn't know and have before, that helps us to do even more, such that now, getting back to that whole housing thing, the city of Flagstaff has now proposed a $20 million bond that's on the ballot to help address the housing needs in this community. It's in some sense a drop in the bucket in terms of what's needed, but that's $20 million that's going to make a major impact for a lot of people. And we were the ones that were initially propelling this forward. And so we are a positive influence in this Flagstaff community. Most people don't necessarily know it because we're ecumenical, but God is moving things forward. A small group of people doing something much, much bigger than we could have done by ourselves, at any rate. So I think I'm at that point of 15 minutes. But I guess if you have just a couple little more things, part of that spirituality part that we've been doing is generosity. I think it was Marissa that you talked about the building a culture of generosity. That has been very influential and helpful for us as well. During the pandemic, we also started doing anti-racism training. And as a result of that, because of a partnership that we had with the Navajo Lutheran Church, we ended up doing a reparations project that helped them finish then a major, major well project that they were needing to do in their community. And so as a result, thousands and thousands of people are being helped on the reservation because of the lack of water. I mean, 40 to 60% of the people on the reservation do not have running water in their homes. Another thing too is because of our work with students on the campus, we've been embracing a spirituality of doubt. Because of, there's so much of a push today because of anxiety, of this need for certainty, and not wanting to have any doubts whatsoever. You got to have it all clear, all set out, and so you can just push forward and you can roll over all the opposition. Well, as part of that polarization, that lack of doubt, I think, is feeding the polarization. And as we were doing a little bit more study, we came to realize that the lack of doubt was actually a significant contributing factor to Jesus being crucified. The Sanhedrin voted to crucify Jesus because they were certain that Jesus was not the Messiah. They were certain they knew what the Messiah looked like. But because they didn't stop to ask themselves, well, we just assumed that all we knew was correct. What if God is up to something new? And so in allowing that doubt to be present allows us to ask not only questions, but hard questions, difficult questions, wrestling questions. And that it gives us then the space to then seek clarity in the midst of challenges, allowing us to connect with others in ways that, oh, well, you know what, doubt really is a part of my life anyway, but understanding that doubt is different from not believing. But that doubt can still be that a little bit of a bridge that helps meet people who are like, you know what, I don't believe at all. So that's been a sort of a helpful part too for people who are LGBTQ, like, you know what, the church has all been about hate, hate, hate. And being able to sort of say, we can ask questions and wrestle with things like that has also been helpful as well. So I'll stop there.
Thank you to all of our panelists. So what I'm going to suggest is that we take just 10 minutes and stretch. And when we come back, you'll get a chance to pick your breakout rooms where you get a chance to engage any of the panelists that you would like in relation to, you know, how we can be of preparation, how we can be of help in the ministries that you've just heard about, and other kinds of innovative things. And then we'll come back briefly and just hear feedback from that. Does that sound good? So why don't we just stretch for 10 minutes, and it's 45. About why don't we say about 5 minutes till. That sound good? Bob, it looks like you just moved in over there. You got empty bookshelves behind you. I know that look real well.
Yeah, I'm in starting my 3rd month here as interim.
Okay.
And well, I guess they're all unusual situations, but they have a person here who just completed her SAM training.
Uh-huh.
And then felt called to go to seminary. So I'm acting as her supervisor as she begins her seminary education.
Okay.
So that's kind of interesting too.
That's the fun part of this journey. We do get a lot of, you never know what you're going to quite step into, do we? Patsy, do you have the breakout rooms?
Yeah, they're ready to go. All I have to do is just open the rooms.
Gotcha. So what I think we'll do to kind of move it on to time is I'll probably we'll have the breakout rooms to go till 3:20. And then when we come to feedback, we'll be able to keep that on by finishing about 3:30, where we would be.
So we're going to keep them open 15 minutes.
What's that?
Are we going to keep them open 15 minutes? I can set the time, 15 minutes.
Well, it's hopefully a little longer. We're going to go ahead and do it now, from now until so it's about 20 minutes.
Okay.
I just caught the end of that. What did you say? How long we're going to do the breakout rooms from now till when?
Till 3:20.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm setting the clock down for getting out to 2 minutes to give them kind of a 2-minute warning.
Okay. That sound good? That sound like enough time, folks? Okay. Good.
If it's going to be 20 minutes, that means it's 25 minutes then from now.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
About 25 minutes total. Yeah.
All right, I'll make it 25 minutes with
I add really well, don't I?
25 minutes with a 2-minute warning to let them know that they'll be ending, give people time to. All right, I'm going to go ahead and set them up now. Ready?
Okay. So everyone's welcome to sign into the to one that you would like to go. Again, no competition here. We're not gonna be keeping attendance and putting off, and but we've been blessed we've been blessed in this. And so I hope you enjoy the conversations you'll be able to have. So go ahead and select a breakout room and drop in.
Oh, there it is.
Here we go.
Howdy. Let's see. Never sure how these breakout rooms are going to go. Thanks for your presentation, Kurt. I'm actually here in the Grand Canyon Synod too, and I find it quite fascinating. I want to come up and visit sometime. I'm in Gilbert, so
Okay.
yeah, it would be fun to come up and sort of see what's going on there at the campus and with all your partners. Hi, Mark. You're on mute.
There we go. I do that all the time. I don't know why. I think I talk like people are able to listen to me. But so thanks for the reminder.
Yeah, so this is an opportunity to ask questions of Kurt or share your ideas of things that you've been doing that are similar.
Yeah, I'm really kind of I'm at the stage of the interim where I am, I've done the interim process, and the call committee is now doing its work. So it's kind of in a, kind of a waiting period.
Limbo.
So I'm sure if you've been involved in interim ministry, you know what that's like. And what I've usually done is try to focus on some area of the congregation that needs maybe a little bit different, or like a little bit more work, or maybe it hasn't been worked on before. And in many cases, that's that area is stewardship. And some of my interims many of my interims have coincided with the calendar year, so that I begin an interim, early in the year, January, February, and so then by summertime we're doing, and by fall we've got, the transition, the transition is done, transition team is done, call committee's appointed. And then you get to fall, and then what happens in fall? Well, then that's a good time to do stewardship. So,
Kurt, how have you handled that specifically? Or, you sold the building, so that sort of changed your stewardship, I think, a bit.
To a certain degree, yes. We have rent now rather than a mortgage, and the rent is significantly less. But there's still the broader. There's still the broader stewardship of time and talents as well. And so, we still do it because it's still a function of, there's the spirituality of where is God at work? And where are we then going to, as disciples, be faithful in following? And how are we going to use the treasures that we have to make that happen? And so that's been a conversation. It's meant to be all year long, but there's already so many other things going on that in some sense, the financial side usually gets left to right about this time of the year.
Yeah.
And so, there's nothing new there either, but there's always that sense of there's a sense of stewardship of our time and talents throughout the rest of the year. Of there's some sort of a ministry going on, or how are we partnering up with somebody else? And so looking for God's fingerprints and going, aha, over there, then we go.
Also, I'm curious, you have such a large following online. Has that translated to any financial help with the congregation? Do you ask for anything? I'm just curious how that works.
Yeah, we do put in something in there and asking for assistance. Or any donation, and a little bit does come in, not a whole lot, but we also don't want to become dependent upon.
Right. I was just curious.
Yeah, and so we've recently begun tweaking how we do the online portion to make it a little bit more intentional for local. That way, then we can hopefully do a better job of building those more interpersonal connections then. But a lot of the times what's happening is somebody down in Phoenix happened to see our video on Facebook, liked it, And a relative in the Philippines then saw it then too, and said, oh, that's great too. And they follow then also. And so that's how some of that connection is going. But I don't necessarily expect somebody in Phoenix or the Philippines to provide financial support for us in Flagstaff. This is almost more of a matter of we're casting seeds and then hoping that somebody will go, oh, and then find something more local for themselves.
Okay. Okay. Hi, Doris. You're muted. You're muted.
There we go.
Yep.
I'm a little slow getting to these things technologically, but I'm here now.
That's okay. Did you have any questions for Kurt?
Yeah, first of all, comment of appreciation. Thank you for saying that redevelopment takes 7 to 11 years.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, why the ELCA never figured that out when they always set redevelopment up to be a 3-year process where funds were always decreasing in those 3 years. So thank you for offering that. I needed to hear that. Having said that, I'm in the same process with discipleship versus membership development.
Mm-hmm.
And other than saying, this is where we are, and this is where we're trying to go in concept, how are you handling the issue of getting people to commit under a discipleship framework?
I understand your struggle, and at the exact same time, because the congregation had already bought into it before I arrived, I didn't have to go through that struggle. It's more a matter of maintaining it. And part of the way we did it is just simply how we wrote our new mission statement about inviting, challenging, growing, and grace-filled discipleship.
Okay.
And so the first 3 gerunds were about sort of guiding steps for ourselves, but ultimately recognizing that it was all a function of our discipleship, of our vocation as children of God. And so it was also a matter of understanding the difference between then I'm doing my duty and I fulfilled my job of doing this job for 2 years because that's what I was elected to do or something like that. And now I can step away and it becomes somebody else's turn. And instead understanding it is we're all working together for the same direction. And it doesn't change whether my discipleship takes on different forms, whether I'm in a leadership position, a follower position, a support position, or whatever. But I'm always having that part because that baptismal part is a daily dying and rising.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm looking at it from that daily point of view, rather than a 2-year time period or a set time period, then it creates a different point of view then. Okay. And the vocation idea that Sarah talked about at the very beginning sounds true to me too. Okay. What sort of pushback are you getting or something like that?
Well, first of all, context, reality. This is a congregation, really, it sounds like what Marie lived through, and it's an older congregation that was formed in the membership model, and is committed to being there and supporting the ministry. But these concepts that bring different words with the concept are initially just kind of brushed off, sort of like when I went from committees to ministry teams and tried to cultivate that language. It was like, that's not what we're used to hearing. And even though I wrote it in the Constitution under revision, there was still we're not going to pay attention to this really. We're just going to keep referring to ourselves as committees and waiting for the regular monthly meeting so we can schedule another one. And I had to, hearing that as pushback that wasn't like direct pushback, but it was pushback. I had to say, well, okay, I'm just going to keep nurturing this and pushing it out here and teaching it and exposing it until they can catch the spirit of it and then go with it. And so I'm at that beginning stage with discipleship versus membership now. I'm casting it out there. I'm seeing them kind of turn a deaf ear, like, we don't know how to live in that. And that's fair. They don't, because they haven't done it before. But just, just wondering if there was a way to approach it that would make it more palatable for people that this is new to.
Right. I have a couple different questions and thoughts now. It kind of sounds like they want that silver bullet or somebody else to come in and tell them what to do. And they're not used to having to take some leadership themselves. And so what I wonder about is, are they still thinking of the pastor as the spiritual plumber? We call an employee to come in and take care of our clog. And once that clog gets taken care of, then all the people will come flooding in.
Yeah, that is what that's the stance they had when I walked in the door, because all the previous pastors were sort of in charge.
Right.
And they did what the pastor said, and they didn't do anything outside of that. So the novelty that I brought was, guess what? If the Spirit inspires you and it's consistent with the mission that God has given us discernment with, guess what? You can run with it. You can do many, many things, and you don't have to wait for the pastor to say, it's okay for you to do that, or I'll do it and you all follow. So that trend I've been working that trend for 5 years with them, to sort of turn that screw where leadership is understood as a disciple being active in the context of mission. But I didn't use those words up front because those were unfamiliar words. Those were.
Yeah, what I'm hearing you say is that there's a particular power dynamic where all the power has been invested in one person, namely the pastor.
Yeah.
And they don't have any sense of there being shared power, or that they have been empowered to do this work. And so I kind of wonder what happened maybe in the past that caused them to sort of say, and I better not try and use that power because I'm going to get slapped down.
Oh, you know what happened? There were a pastor that removed people. There were pastors that were very blatant in letting people know you've stepped out of your zone and you better get back in. And the only power that people could have was to lead. So, under some of those pastorates, there was decline. There were people that went out the door because they also saw that other people were being kicked out the door, or governance process to the council. I'm going to get rid of this person, kind of those really powerful episodes in their history. So when I came in the door, besides the fact that I'm a woman pastor and I'm a Black woman and this is a white community, they weren't believing me at first that they had power as disciples of Christ to be active and engaged and participate. And so I had to, work. I've worked really hard with them, and they've done good over the years of taking on their sense.
Can I ask where you are? A city or rural?
Oh, I'm in Findlay, Ohio.
Okay.
At St. John's. Lutheran, and I've been there 5 years, but I went in for a 2-year intentional interim with
Wow.
the expectation that I would do that process with them because I'm a trained intentional interim. This is what I've done in the ELCA for 20 years. So I knew I had an in and an out date, but we got to a place of things. It was just before the pandemic came that we didn't know was coming, but there was work that was revealed during the intentional interim process, and namely the creative work of selling the property to begin again, to create some funding for continued mission, because the building was taxing them too much. They had 5 acres on a campus, and they didn't have the numbers and the finances to make repairs with the building and also support the ministry, and that included having a pastor.
Yeah.
So I agreed to a 3-year term call with them to take them, accompany them in that process. And that's about to end at the end of this year. But I continue to cultivate these new things that are very much Senate motion as well. The Northwest Ohio Senate is cultivating discipleship versus membership, bringing that forward as a way of being the church. So I'm consistent with the Senate, but I'm looking for the space where I will exit and their next leader will be discerned in the call process, or leadership team, or I've kind of planted that seed to let's be creative here. It might not be ordained pastor to congregation. It might be a leadership team, depending on what you need.
Yeah.
And helping them discern what they need. So that's kind of the context of things.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You told me how it was that there was a pastor that sort of smacked people down. Yeah, it sounds like there was accountability, but it was out of balance.
It was very much out of balance. Yeah.
And that reminded me then of a book that I used with this congregation that really helped the leadership, the council in particular.
Okay.
And that I think that because the council members were also then the team leaders, they then took it with them into their teams, and this helped them. And the book is called Healthy Congregations, Faithful Pastors.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, I've used that. Very good. It's a very good book.
Yeah.
You use that, Mark?
Yes.
We didn't have to do the whole book, but sort of that devotional, we would just do 1 chapter, maybe 2 chapters as sort of a devotion at the beginning for conversation, discussion, and that allowed things to be opened up. And because I wasn't the one who was doing the teaching, it was somebody else, and it was much freer then to have that conversation. So there wasn't that same power dynamic because it wasn't coming from me, it was coming from somebody else.
Yeah.
I wonder if that might be helpful for you then as well.
No, that was I've used that in 3 of my interims as just kind of a educational piece and getting the congregation to focus on some mission, vision kinds of issues. I like that opening chapter with that had the 10 values of a healthy church. Because those were things that it was easy for the congregation to, at least the leaders, to identify with and say, yes, we need to do better at this, or we're doing okay at this, but we need to do better on this other value.
Yeah, one of the other sections too is in terms of how do you have a healthy relationship with your pastor then as well? And it sounds like, I think that's true for a lot of congregations, there's an unhealthy connection or understanding of the role of the pastor. And so this book also helps with that. So it helps the pastor to be healthier and the congregation to be healthier then as well, because that relationship is in a better balance.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that did help this congregation is I came in on a part-time basis, which they had never had before. And they didn't even know that they could have a part-time pastor of any kind, intentional or otherwise. They had interim pastors before, and they were always full-time, even though their finances were taking a great hit. So I introduced them to, guess what? You can do ministry. You can be a faithful congregation with a half-time pastor. And guess how it's done? You develop as leaders and take on more responsibility of the mission and accountability in relationship with the pastor. And that part has really worked well. You know, we really do have a good balanced relationship because I keep my boundaries. I don't work full time and get paid half time.
Right.
I just don't do that. So they've had to learn how to come up and find their lane of their giftedness, which has been a joyous thing to watch and participate in on the sideline. And I really feel like I'm behind them now instead of in front of them. You know, when I came in, I did a whole lot more facilitating and you know, mentoring and helping people learn how to talk to one another in faithful and constructive ways. And all of that has been good work. So now I feel like I'm behind them and they can do those things themselves. I'm more of an observer of their leadership now than the facilitator of it. But I'm still trying to bring new things like this discipleship understanding. One of the things I did here and in other places, you know, when they have baptisms or what we used to call new members coming in, you know, it was like a membership Sunday. I just changed the wording and I labeled those discipleship Sundays. And it's a time for baptism to be affirmed, either executing a new baptism or the affirmation of another baptism. And I work really hard at not using the word membership when I'm counseling with the people that are coming and when I'm talking about it to the congregation and we're doing affirmation of baptism. It gets tricky when you do your parochial report because that language is still there.
Yep.
In the Constitution, that language is still there. So, but I talk openly about our challenge to make those transitions. So thank you so much for your insight and your work and for this resource.
Glad to help.
Thanks, Kurt. Yeah, and I love that discipleship. I'm going to use that next time. No more members. They're all.
Yeah. Jesus.
That's my new language. Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens.
To talk to each other because we learn from each other too.
Yeah. There's a good book about understanding the difference between membership and discipleship, but unfortunately, I'm totally drawing a blank on the name of the book. So.
Okay, it's if I Google it, I probably will be able to find it out there. Do you know, Mark?
No, can't help you on that.
I don't either, but I would love to.
Yeah, it's just a little book. It's not very big, and a few pages long, but
discipleship versus membership or something like that.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, I'm just totally drawing a blank on the name.
That's okay. If you think of it, you could always email me or something and then I can put it out for everybody.
Yep.
Might be helpful. Thank you.
Yep, sure.
It's nice to see all of you.
Yep, good to see you too.
Your name on the interim pastors thing, but I've never really talked to you, so that's good.
I know.
Pastors, ELCA interim pastors on Facebook, Doris?
Pardon me?
ELCA Lutheran interim pastors on Facebook, the group?
I'm not in it because I don't do a lot of Facebook stuff, but
okay. I think we're.
Yep.
Are we going back to big group
Yeah, I
now?
think so. Yeah. Take care.
Was, okay. The shirt does not really match the color.
Oh, see, that's why my wife won't let me pick out my clothes, because I have that issue with colors, but it looked close in the Zoom. But that's what, when I pick ties, that's what ends up happening. So you don't want me to do that anyway.
Well, she doesn't let me out of the house. It's really bad. So.
Well, I think we've got everybody. Everybody should be back at this point. I'm pretty sure. Pop back in. I think they all closed out. Welcome back. I'm just gonna give a couple minutes if we can just kind of report back on what you heard, what you learned, noticed, wondered, whatever came out of the group. I'm going to start with Sarah's group. So,
who is the reporter for that group?
I'll talk.
Sure you will, Zach.
as you will. No. Well, I think we ended up talking about the comment that each within God's mission, each church has its own particular vocation. That each church is going to play its part of the larger puzzle piece and have its own identity, its own. I gave the example of where I am. I'm on a tiny little island, and if you put all the churches together, you've got one small to medium-sized church. And so each church, rather than being in competition with each other, the Assemblies of God Church has the youth ministry program. Our church really has a preschool program, and rather than trying to fight to get everything in one church, support the other church with what their piece of the puzzle is, and give thanks to God that you've got the part of the puzzle you've got, and do the best with it that you can. But I mean, you do have, I think the danger is everybody wants to be the full service church. We've got everything, and you've always got somebody. I got one guy here, despite the fact that this other church has the huge youth program. Every meeting, he says, we need to hire a youth minister. And there's 5 people that go, shouldn't we have some youth if we're going to hire a youth minister? So, so I think that was kind of like, that was kind of where we ended up queuing in on. I will shut up.
You will. Good. Anybody else from Sarah's group?
Okay.
Okay, let's go to Marissa's.
Yeah, I have this opportunity to talk. Marissa's got my back. First, I'll say why I joined Marissa's group was I couldn't keep up with all the ideas, and I just needed to hear more because I'm an old guy and need them. So during our breakout session, we talked a lot about and Keith started with what would have been helpful, and we eventually got there. Let's see, we talked at first. Marissa offered up a bunch of just the resources on the ideas and the innovation of sharing during worship, which I just thought was really emancipatory in terms of how to do those kinds of things. But we also talked about, in her situation, she was joining 2 congregations. And it was, she started her call in May of 2020. So what was helpful for her was the previous pastor had left a list of the shut-ins with a little bit of narrative on each one, and she was able to have a phone call with the previous pastor. So that was good. There was she did mention that the passwords and the internet speed and those kinds of things, she needed to have those re-upped, and so that would have been helpful. We also talked about a hospitality audit, but particularly the facility audit in our conversation was very accessible in terms of having people be aware that we're doing an audit of the facility. So go into the room and be aware of what you observe and give the room a score. and then identify in the future, maybe Reformation Sunday or a coming wedding or something, when that's a milestone when you're going to tend to these things that you've discovered in your audit. The other thing was they found the significance of counsel on Zoom during this time, but also became very much aware that they needed mixers once in a while just to get everybody together. Marissa talked about the Dandelion Project, and it's the second time I've heard about it in this conversation. I hadn't heard about it before, so I'm interested in more of that, but that the laity of the congregation go as participants and they come back with stories to tell and share. Other factors were, because she used the word we a lot, we discerned that it was the council, the people in the Dandelion Project, the willing membership, talked about holy experimentation, and I'm looking for, Lynn noticed that label it an experiment, and then if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's not cast in stone. And don't measure things by success and failure, but don't measure things by successes, but rather just be sure you're being faithful. Marissa also talked about when you do change, it shouldn't be too hot or too cold, because nobody's comfortable with if it's too much change or not enough. So I think I got it covered.
You did great, Mark. Thanks.
Oh, wait, well, we did spend some time on grief.
Yes.
And that was very significant in terms of there's so much buried grief, and a lot of congregations maybe live in denial. I think Scott was telling us about, they get, we're okay. And it's like, no, you got to look deeper.
Yeah. Yeah, we did talk a lot about grief. That was an important piece. So Alan's group, not Alan, but Alan's group.
I think I got nailed with this. The pattern that Alan is working with really intrigued me to finally find the group. A little clumsy at that. But the traditional pattern for interim or transformative work has been for one person to be the interim pastor until the next pastor comes. That's not what's happening these days, particularly for rural parishes and for people with a lot of older folks, that they still need interim service, but you can't afford to have someone full-time or to dumb the thing down so that nothing can get accomplished by finding ways to juggle with part-time work. So the use of solid interim work can be done. Sometimes it can be shared between 2 or 3 people, and congregations would have a chance to work through some of the things they really need to be doing. And the other thing we talked about again was the training of lay people to do ministry work in congregations, but do so in such a way so there's accountability. And those, I think, are really, really very important for a good number of congregations, and not just in the rural areas. We see a lot of similarity with congregations that were based in a neighborhood, in a city, and how they just gradually keep imploding. And so the idea of sharing and working together and meeting the needs, particularly for intimacy and for contact and relationships and new things. Very, very important. So I commend the folks in South Dakota.
Thank you. Beth Marie's group.
Hi, I was duly nominated and elected by my group. More like railroaded.
Amen.
Probably because I asked the question, because I was intrigued with Beth Marie's comment about starting at a congregation that was near death and she thought she was going to have to close it. So I asked the question about what do you do with a congregation that when you've tried a lot of these things and worked with them, that they need to realize that they're going to be closing soon. So we had a wonderful conversation about all the different strategies of how to try to do the revitalize the congregation, but came to, well, for me, it's like, yeah, we've tried that. Yeah, we've tried that. We've tried that. And so it's working through the process of getting the congregation to realize that there is no viable ministry left and they have to have a good closure, which I still don't know how to do, but I'll work on that later. So it was different conversations with different people that were in the group about the congregations were small and they needed maybe to start realizing that it was time to close, but to figure out a way of processing it all together. To which one person said, well, everyone in town knows the congregation is closing, so someone left the cemetery a huge bequest in their will.
To the tune of $2 million left to the cemetery fund.
So what, a dying congregation that could have helped, but it wouldn't have done the ministry, right? So that's where we were about it. Does that sound about right, group? I can see a lot of faces. Yep.
Good. So Kurt's group. Kurt's group.
I was in Kurt's group. Mark or Doris, do you want to say anything? There were just four of us. Doris, go ahead, unmute. Doris, you need to unmute.
I always forget about that. I was late to the group, so I don't know what they were talking about before I got there. But I was expressing appreciation for Kurt's making it known that redevelopment takes 7 to 11 years. And that this church, the ELCA, has always set redevelopment pastors up for a 3-year miracle with declining resources. And then there's this awful trauma when it doesn't turn around in those 3 years, both for the pastor and for the people of that congregation. And I've lived through that. So I was appreciating that, but I was also interested in some more perspective that Kurt had lifted up about discipleship versus membership. The use of the language, the mentality, in theory, what are we talking about? Trying to get new people under that understanding, but also the challenges of dealing with people that have been in a congregation all their life and they've always been a member. And you start talking about discipleship, it's a trickier dance. So he offered some perspective on that. There was a book, Healthy Congregations, Faithful Pastors, that was offered as a resource so that as you live through pastoring in an intentional interim way, a congregation that's always had pastors that pretty much ran everything. And now I've been there cultivating members, disciples, finding their giftedness and becoming more active in the membership, in the ministry of the congregation. And Mark said he has used this book and it's been very effective in that he served as intentional interim. Anybody else want to add?
Covered it all very well there, Doris.
Well, what were y'all talking about before I got there? I was late. I had technical issues. I had to figure out how to get to the breakout group. It took me longer. But that was my experience with the group. And thank you, Kurt, always.
Anything else with the group?
I just really like that idea of dropping membership terminology altogether and just start using discipleship as the norm. It's hard for older congregations or older people in the congregations who've always been members, but I think going forward, discipleship is much better, and I'm not sure why when membership became so important and sort of took over from discipleship in the church. Years ago, back did that happen? Because originally they were disciples, and somehow somewhere along the line it changed.
Absolutely.
Changed back.
I think about in all the reports, I kept hearing from all the panelists the importance of the training that we do have as interim pastors to help congregations with history, heritage, to help them in terms of vision and a sense of identity and purpose, core values, all of those things that are family systems theory, all of those things that are core aspects of our training, I heard really affirmed in all the panelists that spoke, which was, I think really neat. I know there's a lot more we can do, but I hope it was a blessing to hear these stories of innovative ministries that we've been blessed to have. Thank you. I want to say just a great thank you to the panelists who shared with us and for the opportunity to engage us along the way as well. We've been truly blessed. And I just we want to bring it, keep it on that time. And there was just a couple things I wanted to share with the group, and then we can open it up for discussion. I'll leave open, and we can chat as people would want to or not, and we'll kind of take it from there. Does that sound okay? Because you know how afternoons get on Mondays anyway. So.
Yeah.
So I just want to let you know about IMA real briefly, what it is that we're doing. IMA is an organization that's been around about as long as Dick Matheson. Well, not that long, but Dick's been part of it since way back when. But
part for more than 20 years, but it goes back, I think, at least 25 years. Thanks.
And it's an organization that is like transitional ministry gone through a lot of change, and I think innovative ministry right now can also be a part of what we're looking at, because I think all transitional ministry is innovative ministry out there. I think whenever we walk into something, whenever we step into any place, you just don't know what you're doing. You have no idea what you're going to walk into. Our training helps. But it is truly stepping into unusual circumstances. I heard from really all the panelists along the way the same kind of thing in innovative ministries. Transitional ministry, interim ministry is the same thing. We're looking at IMA now as we're moving into a new time. There was a lot of connections with what is now LUTMA, but it was NAILIP. There's been some changes that have happened in relationship to how we're going to support interim ministry in the ELCA. And that's what IMA's focus is going to be. And we're going to be looking, we've developed recently, it's one of our newer things, is a database. And the database is searchable by bishops and staff in the ELCA regarding availability. And it's not just for interim ministry or transitional ministry, but also consulting, coaching, other kinds of specialized things that can be helpful, gives indication for that. but the bishops can look for that. And the more we can get people on there, the better that a gift is. We started out making it, you had to be a member to be on there. And then we prayed about it and really realized that people who were putting their names on there might not have jobs. So, yeah. It just made sense that this be a gift from IMA, something that we give to the church. But then IMA as an organization, we want members to be a part as we can support interim ministry, transitional ministry, which I think is in a huge demand out there. We also have a website that's imaelca.org. There'll be that's where we're going to post the recording of this wonderful event, and but also has information about training and other kinds of things that are developing. So be sure and check that out. We hope to offer this once a year. There's going to be a survey that's going to be coming out to all those that participated, but also trying to ask what kind of things do you want to learn about as we plan this annual event, which we hope to make better and better and stronger as we go forward. So be thinking about that. And then we're also looking to make the board a functional board that is addressing the issues of interim ministry. So there may be great ideas, and then we put a group together and we help resource that and make sure that happens as it addresses. It may be from personal things for us as interims, but also things that we may want to do in benefit to the larger church. So if you're interested in being on the board, please it's info, imaelca.org. We would love to have a conversation with you as we build this stronger. But we just have a strong hope for the future and where this is taking. And these wonderful panelists have done an incredible job of increasing that. As we continue to remember, it's a difficult time out there. It's what you hear about is a lot of negativity, but we have the chance to bring hope, possibility. We have the chance to have people reconnect, discover themselves, but also more than anything, discover where God is already preparing that place for them as they move forward. So what a blessing it's been. I want to thank everybody for being a part of this. I hope it was. We're going to have some feedback, as we said, that we would love to hear. But I hope it's been a blessing to everybody. And at this point, I'm gonna have a word of ask for a word of prayer from Patsy. Would you do that for us? And then why don't we just leave it open here if any conversation or but let's say thank you to all the panelists and to the ones that presented, and thank you for all you've done. So Patsy, can you offer a prayer?
Sure. Let us pray. Gracious God, we are so pleased to be called by you, to be called not only to be pastors, to be transition pastors, which is a whole different ministry, one that we feel is so important to help congregations consider their past, realize where they are now, and also project where God may be leading them in the future. So we give thanks for all the people who came today to this event. May their ministries be blessed as they go out. Hopefully we've all learned something new to share. And I pray that we remember that everything we do for you, and we do in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Patsy. I hope that we will have more opportunities also to get together in person along the way as time goes forward, to connect. I think that's impacted a lot of things we do. But I'll open it up. Anybody have anything else that they want to say or share? We've covered it all. What? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just
say a
gonna
big
say
thank you.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together.
So I pray blessings upon everybody's ministry, and just I pray we can continue to lift up and support each other in these wonderful things, and let's continue to serve. I think I see Mark. Mark, you got your hand up? You're muted. Mark, you're muted. Oh,
It was a little reaction thing, just thumbs up.
oh, okay. Gotcha.
I won't do it again.
Well, blessings to you all and thank you. God bless.
Okay.
Thank you.